that when you get together. Now, this is something that you could do as entire Morningside, not just your individual 10 to 15 groups, but you could actually do a skills and equipment inventory and find out who has what skills. How many of you have ever gone to a church service when somebody says, okay, we're giving out this piece of paper and we want to know what areas of expertise do you have? Or are you like a prayer leader or warrior, or do you do this or that, or what's your background? And they kind of get a census as to what their congregation capabilities are. Well, you need to do the same thing here. How many of you have maybe law enforcement or a military background, or you're good in carpentry, or you're good in plumbing, or you have nursing background, or medical background? You need to find out a skills and equipment inventory, and you'll be amazed at how much you could say, well, listen, I'll make myself available during a disaster if I'm able to do so, and these are the skills that I have. Actually, some of these skills at some point in time will become bartering tools, if you know, where I can do this for you and you can do this for me, and we'll get together and it'll work out just fine. But then create a neighborhood map. So if you do develop these 10 to 15 individuals working together, lay that out. And actually, by the way, do you have propane gas here in this area? Individual tanks, so each individual home has their own propane? No, here we're all electric. What's that? We're all electric here for the most part. All electric, but there are some that do have propane. So if you do have a propane tank, it would be important to identify who has the propane tank, who has gas coming into their home, because, for instance, you may know how to shut it off, but maybe you're gone. And if you have this map your neighborhood situation, you would be able to have somebody that would know where to go to shut it off to make it safe for the neighborhood, because fires starting from broken lines with LP gas can become a very major factor. So even if you know how to take care of it, if you have a map your neighborhood situation, if you happen to be gone, then others in that group will be able to help take care of that problem for you. That's one of the things that you can do. So sketch out and outline your neighborhood, putting the phone numbers, email addresses, and whatever information contacting, and perhaps even alternative family members as to who could be contacted should there be difficulties. You also need to create a neighborhood contact list, and that's where you're going to list all this information that I've already explained to you. It's going to be very important. Now, you're in less of a difficulty than most neighborhoods. Now, those of you that are online that are watching this, giving out information to your neighbors may be a risky situation. You're going to have to determine that. You need to know who you can trust, who you can't trust. If you're in this environment here and you're all living together and you can trust each other, then sharing this information is fine. But there are going to be some neighborhoods where you can't trust this information with everybody. It can be misused and abused, and particularly if you live in a neighborhood where you have latchkey kids, situations like that, it could become very dangerous. But anyway, once you have created the equipment and inventory list, and you've sketched out your neighborhood list, you know what your neighborhood is, and you've created a contact list, then what you need to do is to identify a neighborhood care center. Where would you be bringing people if ever there is a disaster? Now, in this situation, this building may become the best place to bring people to, but you have a predetermined meeting place, and I would suggest that perhaps it might even be worthwhile to store some inflatable mattresses that could be utilized here. And as a group, you could just do that. Just find a place to store them, and so if you have to have people lie down in blankets so that you'll be able to take care of people, you can kind of see how this is like I don't know what building this is in, but here's a neighborhood care center. And you predetermine this, where you need to have people come together. And this would be ideal. But for those that are online, that if you don't have a place like this to be able to come to, you can look at a garage, a carport, a big porch, community center, local fire station, municipal building within the community, wherever you're at. But you should always select an alternative site, because the site you choose may not be available for some reason. And caring for the elderly during this time. You know, if there are major disasters, you're going to be bringing people back to this predetermined meeting place. This is where you're going to be caring for them if they can be transported. Now, if a person is injured and cannot be moved, you're going to have to take care of them in the place where they're at. But if they can be brought to a central place, this would be an ideal place to be able to bring them. And of course, one of the real difficulties, which you don't have here, I don't believe, you wouldn't have any latchkey kids here in this particular community, I don't think. But I've run into situations to where children as young as 5 and 6 years of age are left for hours at home by themselves. And if ever there should be a fire in those homes, can you imagine? You've got to work things out with neighbors and be able to take care of those. That's a very difficult situation whenever you have latchkey kids. But also, you probably do have some children that are younger around here that need to be looked after in disaster situations, and so that is something you probably have to consider. Don't get the cart before the horse. I started to say hearse, but there are 6 steps that need to be taken first in a disaster. The first one is take care of your family first. If a disaster strikes, make sure your family is taken care of. The second one is protect your head, hands, and feet. In other words, this is where you should have sturdy shoes, leather gloves, a hard hat, and a bicycle helmet actually will work to protect from glass and other debris. And if you're hooked up to gas, inspect the gas meter. If there's any question, shut it off. And that's where you're having your map, your neighborhood's going to come in. Because some of you raised your hands saying you do have gas. Your neighbors need to know that in case you're not there, so that they'll know how to take care of the problem for you at your place and be able to shut it off outside so it's not going to be coming into the home and be a potential fire hazard. And the other one is shut off your house water at the main house valve. I talked to you about this before, where that if there's a chance that the water lines are going to be contaminated, shut it off so that you're not going to get contaminated water coming into your house, and then you're going to have safe water there. The 5th one is post the OK and help card. One of the things they recommend with Map Your Neighborhood is create a large sign that says OK, another one that says help. And then you could actually place that in the window, that if you have search and rescue or other people going around trying to determine who needs help, if there's a sign that says everything's okay, they know to go on to the next house. If you need help, that will be noted. If there's no sign up, then that means they'll still stop by and check, because that may mean you're injured, you need more help, and even if you didn't have a chance to put a help sign up, they're going to come in and check on you. So the 5th step is post the OK or help sign. And the 6th one, which actually is more applicable to the situation where there's a lot of earthquakes and that type of thing, they were suggesting up in Washington State that you take fire extinguishers and place your fire extinguishers outside to be able to help other people in case of fires. Up there they had an awful lot of LP gas, and a lot of people might have fires. I don't necessarily recommend taking the fire extinguishers outside, but make sure that they're available should there be fires in your neighborhood. And if they're minor fires, help them fight it. If it's a major fire, don't get involved. You know, try to protect the areas to prevent the fire from spreading, but don't try to take on a fireman's job. Okay, number 7, the 7th step out of the 9 is gather at the neighborhood care center. In fact, you may say, well, that's going to waste a lot of time. But the truth is, if you'll all come to, if those that are able to, that are not injured, and now if somebody's injured in your family or your neighbor, you stick with them, you stay with them, you don't come. But if you're able to, come to the neighborhood care center, and there you'll do your planning, because that's where you're going to do step 8, and that is assign groups of neighbors to do 4 primary critical tasks. One of them is going to be the home team, the one that actually stays in the center. They'll be the ones that'll be communicating with your fire and police, and also with the walkie-talkies with the rescue teams that are going out. But this will be the command center. So some of the folks are going to be here as your home team. They'll be the ones taking care of the elderly, the injured, the people that are brought into the care center. So that's your home team. Then the next one is the special needs teams. If you've pre-identified on your contact list who has special needs. You'll have those teams go to those places. Like if you know somebody is in a wheelchair, somebody can't get out, you know they're the ones that are going to have special needs, you'll have teams that go out and actually check on your special needs list. By the way, never go out one by one unless it's just absolutely impossible to do otherwise. Go out two by two. The reason why is if you have one person and you come across a situation that you need some extra assistance, and you're stuck there, you've got to stay there, but you can't go and get help. So if you have two people, one person could leave and go get some additional help, or if you did have the walkie-talkie, you could indicate that back. But have everybody go out two by two with these different teams. So special needs teams, and have gas teams. So if you end up having on your home list where you've got 3 or 4 homes that actually have gas, those teams will go out there and go to those homes first and make sure that there are not the possibility of leaks there and fires being started. And then the last of the 4 teams are the search and rescue teams. And of course, if you have tornadoes and that type of thing, that's going to become a major issue there. But that's where you've got to have your hard hats, your gloves, your boots, and be able to protect yourself. You need to know not to get near down power lines. I mean, we've known people trying to rescue people who themselves are electrocuted. You know, if a power line is in a pool of water, you know, you just have to know how to be able to work in disaster situation. And that's where actually the CERT programs come about and teach you. They actually teach you a light search and rescue. They teach you how to handle various types of disasters, minor injuries, and how to handle various situations where there's electrical hazards and gas hazards. So CERT training would be very good, as well as getting training for basic life support and also advanced life support. That type of training would be very worth your while. And the last step, step number 9, is once you've completed your assignments as individual teams, go back to the home center, the predetermined place of meeting, and report, and then everybody will know what's going on. By that time, the home team will actually have reports from the fire and police and others usually, and you'll be able to know what's happened to your neighborhood. By the way, let me just quickly finish up with this issue on Map Your Neighborhood model. This goes back to the idea of networking the body of Christ. One of the things I'm recommending in my book is that you can form meetings in your home, and I give a suggestion as to how to do things like identify your neighborhood, ask 1 or 2 of your neighbors to join you to form a core team, identify the best location to meet, set the date and time, and then personally go out and invite your neighbors. Well, this is when you don't know your neighbors. In this situation, you know your neighbors. It's a little bit different. But you come together, and what I'm saying to those that are on the internet right now, you could use this as an opportunity not only to get to know your neighbors, which unfortunately in the world today, we often don't know our neighbors. It'd be a way of forming relationships, but also then it would be a way of being able to be either a silent witness or an open witness, and to be able to share your faith. Mother Teresa said, witness at all times, sometimes use words. And so our very actions are going to be what's going to be giving testimony. And in fact, that situation that I told you about in Goma, Zaire, where 10,000 bodies were on the ground and 60,000 people died over 6 weeks, we couldn't speak the language of the people, didn't speak French, didn't speak Lingala. We serviced the people, starting IVs, nasal gastric tubes, worked so hard saving people's lives. We couldn't talk to them, but about 6 weeks after this work started, they erected a tent church. And even though we weren't able to really speak to them about our faith, the local people there, the Hutus that were refugees, they named the church, God Walks in This Place. So there's a witness that's there, whether or not we're able to verbally express it or not. And so that's something that I would really say that these neighborhood meetings that if you have, and in fact, if you can draw in if there are some people in the outlying areas that you want to bring them in, this could become very much of a tool to be able to share your faith. And I talk about preparedness peace models. There's also ADRN, that's the Austin Disaster Relief Network. There's a Christian Emergency Network. There's so much more that I have that I could share with you. that there are models out there to network churches and network communities. This ADRN group down in Austin, Texas, they have 130 churches that they've networked. They actually have been able to train thousands of people in terms of CERT training, CISM, critical incident stress management. They've been able to allow people to go into disastrous situations and counsel. They've been able to adopt over 1,600 families that have been hurt by disasters, and because they have 130 churches that are involved. And so different members within those churches will adopt a family that's hurt. In fact, the way they adopt them is they sign actually a contract. For the next 90 days, we as a family agree to stand behind your family if you need transportation, if you need somebody to sit down and fill out forms with you. You know, it's not where you're inviting them into your home and having them live with you. It's not that kind of an adoption. But you say, we'll stand beside you and help you walk through this traumatic time. And they've actually had about 1,600 families that they've been able to help that way. So there's many creative ideas, and I really could spend an hour and a half just talking about that. But we as believers need to be salt and light in this world, and we need to make our light shine, because things are going to get darker. But guess what happens? The darker things get, the bright things are, even the smallest light becomes bright. And you know what? There is no darkness, no matter how deep, that has overcome the weakest light. Light always wins. And so we need to understand that. Are there some questions that we have here? Yeah.
Okay, you've talked a lot about the people in our age group, but there are kids who live here, whether they're grandkids or, you know, children. And I think that there needs to be some kind of a plan that those families get together to figure out how they're going to support and educate and de-traumatize these kids if bad times really come.
Absolutely. That's a very, very good point. I don't know how many children there are, but for instance, the parents might be hurt and the kids need to be taken care of. Somebody needs to have knowledge as to who would be responsible. In fact, this is one of the things that I tell people to do in those kind of situations. Get your kids to know who you want to be responsible for them if you're not available. Let's say that a disaster occurs and mom and dad are in Branson or in Springfield or something else like that, and the kids are home by themselves, but then a disaster occurs that separates them. Where are they going to go? What are they going to do? What is their responsibility? And to have somebody that they know well enough to where saying, okay, and prearrange it. Just don't let it just happen. In fact, I skipped over that one slide that said from here to there. That actually was designed for that kind of a situation, to where children are at home, and when you hear of disasters, you've prearranged to say, go there, go to this building, go to this place, go to this person's home, go to this place of business, because if I'm looking for you and you can't stay at home, I want to know where to look for you. So.
Another question?
How do the leadership positions evolve for someone to make the tough decisions? Like, say it's the middle of summer and disaster hits, and all of a sudden you've got people outside trying to burn their trash, and they don't have it in proper receptacles, and so sparks are going to fly and it's going to set off the woods. How do some of those leadership positions get formed? Do you, on those teams of 10 to 15, do you take one person in a leadership and then go to a larger team?
That's a very good question. I guess I would actually like to ask the question of how this whole area is organized. Do you have like a homeowners association to where you actually already have officers that are appointed within that? Do you have voting that occurs with that? Or if you don't have a homeowners association, then it would be worthwhile for you to actually form one for the very purpose of disaster response, to where you would actually come to an agreement as to, and it may start off by having the 10 to 15 people, because when you try to deal with 100 people or more, you don't necessarily know everybody, and you don't always have the same level of trust. But what you could probably do is, if you had the 10 to 15 where you have a high level of trust between yourselves, pick somebody to sort of be a spokesman for that group, and then get each of the groups, how many are 10 to 15 groups together, get those leaders to come together and meet and discuss how are we going to do this. Now, I'm assuming that in this situation you're going to have to deal with Morningside Church and with Jim Bakker and with the administration here and come to agreement as to how you're going to work some of that out. I don't know all those details, so I can't tell you. But I tell you what, it would be worthwhile right now, when there is not a disaster, to work those details out so you know what chain of command you have, and set up different areas of responsibility. I mean, security is going to be one of them. And then let everybody know how that's going to be handled, and the issue of how you're going to be dealing with fires. And one of the things that you can do, for instance, like I talked about a smoke hood, and most of you weren't familiar with smoke hoods. Well, you know, if you wanted to, you could go around and say, okay, we want to buy 100 of them, and go out and you work out a deal, and you get a reduced price, and everybody gets a lower price, but everybody then has it, and you've taken care of a need for the community, and everybody's contributed their portion for that. I assume in this particular situation you're not dealing where some people couldn't afford to buy their own, but in church situations there are going to be many times where there are going to be some people that can't afford to buy some of this emergency equipment, that the church could say, we'll cover it for this group, we'll cover it for these people, and the others pay their freight. I don't know, is that helpful? Any other questions? Well, oh, there's another question here.
Working in South Asia as a humanitarian, my whole work site burned to the ground in 45 minutes. I was about a quarter of a mile away and ran to that center, found a man that could interpret English into that language and get to the top of that mast with a bullhorn, which I didn't hear. He announced over that bullhorn to 2,000 people, certain people go to a certain house to find children and parents, because they were everywhere and didn't know. But that was so vital.
Wow, in other words, having a method of alarm or an alert would be very worthwhile. Some people do that. There are some areas where they have sirens or they have other horns. There can also be emergency broadcast systems. In fact, if you had everybody hooked into some sort of either internet connection or smartphone connections, you could actually do broadcast information. Now, the government has that. I actually cover this in the book, where they actually can override TV, radio, internet communications, emails. The government can do that, but you could do that on your own, within your own group, where you could do broadcast emails, where everybody was alerted through an email. If you're close enough, I mean, the idea of a siren would not be a bad idea. That a siren, if something that could be heard locally, where people would say, okay, that means I need to get onto the internet, or I need to be doing something to find out what's that siren all about. You know, so that might be a good way to respond. Well, I hope this has been very helpful for you, and I appreciated the opportunity. And by the way, I want to thank the Lord. I have not been coughing.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Why don't we give Dr. Paul another